This is officially recording against the Lakepoint Incorporation feasibility public meeting. Let me introduce Susie Becker from Zions, who will be presenting the bulk of the information this evening, and will be happy to answer questions about the feasibility study. One of the things I will note at the outset is most of what's in the feasibility study is there because that's what the law requires to be studied. And so what you're going to see is not kind of a necessarily, it is wide ranging, but it's not haphazard, and it's not anything that we chose that we should look at. These are what the things that the law requires that we look at and we study. So Susie, if you want to share your screen, I will turn the time to you.
Great, give me just a minute here. Okay. There we go. I'm delighted to be here with you this evening, although in a little different format that we've become more accustomed to over the past year online. My name is Susie Becker. I head up the Municipal Consulting Group at Zions Bank. And just a little background on us, we do all kinds of studies for public entities, for cities, for counties, for water districts, school districts, and a wide range of them, ranging from annexations and corporations. We've done a lot of these over the years. Fee studies, real estate, economic development, housing, that type of thing. So my purpose is just to be a third-party, independent, objective consultant looking at this to give you the information that you need that's required by Utah law, as Justin said. And I just thought for background, you might feel more comfortable if you knew of these ones we've done. Some have proceeded to incorporate. Hooper is an example, Marriott Slaterville is an example. Some have chosen not to. College Young is a study we did, West Mountain down in Utah County. There's a wide range of them, but that's just a sample of a little bit of what we have done. So just a little bit of background quickly. The county received an incorporation petition. We were not involved with that, of course. And then back in November, they hired us to do this feasibility study that's required by law. Based on Utah code, we had 90 days. So this had to be turned in before February 1st. Then there was a comment period when changes or comments could be incorporated. And then we're having 2 public hearings as required by law, and tonight is the first of those. So here is the map of the area, and all of this is in the incorporation feasibility study, which I think the Lieutenant Governor's office has posted online. Justin, nod your head up and down if that's right. Yes, it's online, or thumbs up, that'll do. So you can look at these in more detail there. You can see the area. It's a relatively small area, but it's just goes pretty much south of I-80 there, and you're all familiar, with that area. So as Justin said, we have to follow the code requirements, and we follow these exactly. It's in section 10-2A-205 of the code. And really every chapter in the feasibility study is the next requirement as it's listed in the code of what we need to do. But to try to condense that and just make it sound a little simpler tonight, basically it has a little socioeconomic analysis that you're required to do, population growth, that type of thing. Here's the big one, the 4th bullet point down. The budget for the proposed city, a ratio of revenues to expenses. We need to project out for 5 years by law what the revenues would be generated if Lakepoint were to incorporate, and what the expenses would be. And then what does that mean to your pocketbook on the 5th bullet, the tax impacts to you in the city. And then so that's one area of how it's going to hit you. And then the other area, how's it going to impact the people who are left in the county, unincorporated county. You're still staying in Tualatin County, but in the unincorporated county, if you should choose to incorporate. And so we will talk about that as well. So just about a little bit of this socioeconomic first, a little bit of background. Here's the new residential building permits. You can see they're generally growing over the last few years. They were used as a basis to do population estimates for projections going forward. And you have a large household size. So the number of new residential units was multiplied by a household size a little bit larger than 4 persons per household. You've got one of the bigger ones in the state. Harriman's like that, but it is a little bit larger than average. Area is largely residential or it's vacant. You don't have much commercial development now. About 25 commercial parcels are all you have, but a lot of potential for future commercial. 4.6 square miles, and you do have some large acres of vacant land that remain and could be developed. So one of the things that we wanted to show here is the taxable value per capita. And so in the unincorporated area, the taxable value per capita is about 87,000. You can see Tooele City somewhat lower. This is just important because as you do your, as you collect property tax, which is a major source of revenue for this city, that's significant that your taxable value per capita is so high, and given that you have large household sizes, so you would have quite high taxable value per household. So how do we determine property tax revenues for a new city? You take the taxable value. This was provided to us by the Tooele County Assessor's Office, and the major component is real property. Real property is land and buildings. That's the major component of it. Personal property, if you have big businesses, where you see this number go up is if you have large manufacturing companies, you have big printing presses or machines that make ice cream or whatever. It's the equipment that adds up there. And then centrally assessed is just provided by the state. And these are, it's property that crosses through county lines or different lines. It could be railroad, mining, that type of thing, fiber, electric, whatever. Whoops. Sales tax. This will be another great revenue source as we look at your new budget. And you may wonder about that at first and think, well, we don't have a lot of businesses here. How are we going to get a lot of sales tax? But Utah distributes sales tax a little differently than some states, and half is distributed based on point of sale. That means on the businesses you have there and the actual sales that take place. And then there's also a population distribution that the state divides out based on a per capita, based on a certain amount per person. It's depending on how much the state gathers, and then it just proportionately shares that. The other thing that we've seen since COVID is that our homes are becoming little brick and mortar retail establishments. I bet if I had the ability to ask each one of you if you'd ever ordered from Amazon, I bet I'd get a pretty high response, or other companies that deliver to your home, Target, not trying to favor anyone, but there's been a lot more increase in sales in online purchases, excuse me, during COVID, and this is generating more local sales tax revenues. We've seen a little bit of a shift from the Salt Lake cities maybe to a suburb like Bountiful or something like that. So a municipal energy or a franchise tax. So that people who are, so you haven't been paying one because in the past the counties couldn't charge it and only cities could. We did not project any in this because you're not now paying it. So we wanted to keep apples to apples in the analysis, but that could be a potential revenue source for a new city. And then Class C roads, you've got 105 weighted road miles. It's basically your paved miles times 5. That was provided by the county. And the state distributes road fund money from the gasoline tax, which is based on the number of road miles and population again. So let's look at this here for a minute. As we look at where are we really going to get our revenues, I'll point out a couple of things. Property tax is always a big one. Sales tax, the two components that I just showed you with all the population, is quite significant here. So property tax, let me go back to it. I wanted to make one more comment on that. Property tax depends on the value of your property times the property tax rate. Well, you can establish as a city any property tax rate that you can have public hearings and establish a different rate. So the property tax rate I have used is the same property tax rate that you're now paying to Tooele County for the Municipal Services Fund. So if you look at your tax bill, you're going to pay a Tooele County general fund rate for services they do to everybody in the county, whether you're in a city or not. That won't change if you incorporate. But that mill rate, that levy, that 0.00, and I don't have the number right in front of me, whatever that is for the municipal services tax rate, that will go away if you become a city. And I've just transferred that rate, saying the new city, without any impact to your pocketbook, could collect that much in property tax. Okay, so you have a few other sources here. You can see the sales tax we talked about. Building permits look really high because you are you're having a good amount of growth. On the other hand, you also have to provide a service for those fees that come in for the planning, development, building inspection, and all. So when we see the expenses in a minute, you'll see we've just directly offset these building permits. So it doesn't really matter if we put 100,000 here, because then we put 100,000 in the expenses. So it's a wash, is what I'm saying. Here's your Class B road funds, and then you've got, of course, your total revenues. So here we are, revenues gradually growing a little bit each year with growth, which will increase your property tax, will increase your population distributions, and a little bit of inflation as well. So let's go down to the next slide. And before we talk about expenses, this is something that can be confusing at first. It says the feasibility, it is in the Utah Code. The feasibility consultant shall assume the proposed municipality will provide a level and quality of municipal services that are related to the area of the proposed municipality at the time the feasibility consultant conducts the feasibility study. So often if there's a petition to incorporate, they want something changed, or they may want a different level of service. So let me make it clear, you can do a different level of service if you choose to incorporate. However, for the purpose of the study, I've got to compare apples to apples, the same level of service that you're now getting, okay? So what do you have to be a city? Well, you've got to have by code, by law, a recorder and a treasurer finance officer, okay? You have the potential to contract for a lot of services. So before we look at the whole budget put together, let's look at two of the most obvious ones, which are public safety and roads. Those are two of your biggest costs. So what I did is I talked to, on both of these, on public safety and on roads, I talked to Tooele County to provide an estimate. I talked to Tooele City and to Grantsville. Tooele City was not interested in potentially, this is a non-binding estimate of what it might cost. They weren't interested in submitting one. Grantsville said they might be later, but they're just really quite busy right now with all that's going on. So the only estimate we have of cost is if you were to contract with the county, okay? So for public safety, and there's the documentation behind this in the report. This is what the county provided on its letterhead. It would cost you on a per capita basis. Now, it looks a little low when we compare it to these others, but remember, you've got those large household sizes. So if you're multiplying this by 4 and this one's only by 3, you're going to be in the same ballpark or whatever. But it is in the ballpark. You see it's similar with Stockton there. And I will go in I can tell you a little more about your police. So what you have right now, the chief said there is you have 24/7 coverage. So obviously we would keep that. And he has 4-person crews, a minimum of 3-person. And they're not only serving Lakepoint, but they're also serving Stansbury and Erta. So there's no guarantee that a deputy or patrol is in Lakepoint at any given point in time, is what he said. But obviously, close and patrolling at times, a lot of times. So what he did is he took the total number of calls that you're responsible for compared to the total ones he has to respond to in all the areas that he serves. And he got, so 15.2% of the incidents, which is about 1,320 calls per year, occur within Lakepoint, and the others, that's about 15.2% of the cost plus 10% for administrative. Okay, I'm gonna just move my shutters. Sorry, the disadvantage of doing this from home. Hold on 1 second, because the sun is in my eyes. Okay, there, that is better. I'm so sorry. Never had that happen in a meeting, but that's at least a little bit better. And I'm going to scoot over this way and you won't be able to see. We'll get rid of that sun a little bit. Okay, thanks for your patience. So roads, same type of thing. We talked to the county, and this is the estimate they came up with. It's about $1,500 per weighted road mile. You can see that's higher than Stockton and similar to some of these other areas, given the current level of service that you now have. Okay, so here are some expenses. This is how your budget would build. You can see here the mayor and council. That could be something you would choose to donate for a few years. Merritt Slaterville did that at the beginning, if I recall. Administrative is in addition to your recorder and finance you have to have. That includes full-time salary of $50,000 plus benefits. The building official, you can see, is directly offsetting those building permits that we saw on the revenue side. Legal costs, you've got to have an annual audit, you've got to carry insurance. Building, I always get a question about a building. You do not have to own and buy a building. You can simply rent, and that would count rent and utilities from other facilities that are in your area. You just saw the numbers for public police, plus you had $15 call for dispatch. Here's, you just saw the road numbers. And so we put some extra costs in the initial year startup costs, and you can see that your total expenses are pretty close to your revenues. So what does it all mean? So this is the slide you've all been waiting for. Your revenues and expenses. First year maybe looks a little short. You're about break even, and you are coming out okay. Your revenue, you have to average over time over the 105%, and you do exceed that from these numbers of revenues over expenses. So it is feasible. It's your choice whether you want to do this or not, but based on what I'm required to do legally, that's the statement I have to make. So here we go. Here's an average per capita cost. Oops, go back up. Average cost per capita. Lakepoint, you can see that the cost is just to give you some confidence in the expenses that we are in the ballpark when we add them all up. So now we've looked at the what the budget might be for Lakepoint. Now let's look at how you might impact the rest of the county if you were to choose to leave them. So all of you in Lakepoint are in these taxing districts. You pay taxes to Tooele County, and you also pay to this municipal type service fund, which is, as I was telling you, is the separate rate from this Tooele County. So this down here, this 0.001066, this rate would go away, well, from the county, and instead you could pay this or any rate you choose to enact, but it's the rate I used to the new city. You'd still be in the fire district, no changes to fire, no changes on your mosquitoes, nothing to the school district. Some of you are in Lakepoint Cemetery and Park Service area, some are not, and the Lakepoint Improvement District. And so you're not all on those, but those would still stay. If you're in those areas, you would still pay those tax rates, and you would still get those same services just like you're now getting them. So that's not an issue. This is just a map to show you here quick these different tax areas, depending where you live. Okay, so how are you going to impact the county? The county is the only one that's going to be impacted. It's going to be impacted in two ways, to its road fund and to the municipal services fund. So the road fund, because those Class BC road funds are going to, those revenues are not now going to go to the county, they're going to come to you folks, but you in Lakepoint, but you would have to fix your own roads. So you can see that the amount here over, so we just go through this all this math here, but to show you on all the impact on a $250,000 primary residence, that means it's taxed at 55% of value if it's your primary home, not a second home. It would be about $2.72 a year for those left in the county. So that's really minimal. This one is just maybe like a little bit more. Here's the special revenue fund. We have that how it would be reduced, the Lakepoint allocation. Okay, these are like what they're now getting that they would now not receive but would send to you, but they can also cut their costs a little bit too by not providing some services such as the building permits. But in this one, did we show how much it would impact them? Okay, so the impact for this one is just a little bit more, and I didn't put that slide in. That it's not hugely significant either for those left in the county. Anyway, it just is showing this that incorporation is feasible. Risk may exist if economic downturns may result in decreased sales tax revenues. I mean, if something major were to happen, I just have to analyze, what are the risks to this? Opportunities, some people have suggested that the garbage collection rates might be negotiated at higher levels. I don't know. This is probably the strongest one, that residential development may attract more commercial development and could lead to more retail and office growth. And there are several adjacent areas that could potentially be annexed in the future. And yes, they would probably improve your numbers because you would have fixed costs in place. And so there are economies of scale generally. I just wanted to thank everybody who was so great to help us. Tooele County, Grantsville City, Tooele City did they did respond that they weren't going to respond. So I should have left them too. Utah State Tax, the petitioners were helpful in providing information. The Lieutenant Governor's office, as always, is great. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Justin.
Okay, thank you, Susie. Let's see, we got one question here in the chat so far. It says, when done going over the information, in relation to county impacts, can you answer if since Erda became a city, that we will also be impacted by that due to their money coming out from the county, from their city, and that tax to the county can go up due to Erda becoming a city? Um, I don't know if you have any input on that one, Susie.
Well, I think if you looked at the ERDA study, if you were to stay in the county and ERDA were to becomes its own city, there is a little bit of an impact that was shown in the ERDA study to you, but it was not huge. But yes, there is a little bit. I don't have those numbers on my fingertips, but I could certainly look those up if you ask, and find that for you. If you're asking some other questions that are legal or that Justin needs to answer, I will look that up while
Okay,
we're
great.
online.
Yeah, do we have any other questions or comments from those that are participating? You can either put those questions in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question. So the question is, so I was a little late and you may have answered this. I'm not seeing a benefit to this. What are the benefits? Um, so that's an interesting question and kind of a judgment call. The purpose of the feasibility study isn't necessarily to lay out, benefits, pros and cons. It's really to lay out, if the city were to incorporate, what the costs would look like. So there's not a whole lot that we can say, is this a benefit? Is it a good or a bad thing? Our job is not really to necessarily influence that way. But Susie, I don't know if there's any just numerical benefit that you can think of off the top of your head.
It's pretty close to break even over those first few years and all. And I did just look up the ERDA numbers, and it does appear that there's minimal impacts on the rest of the county from the ERDA incorporation, because they can reduce costs to that large area as well. The county can, so you should come out okay. So that shouldn't be too big of a concern. But that was a good question.
Yeah, very good question. Yeah, we haven't had recently two areas in such close proximity incorporating, so that is certainly interesting. The next question, where do we go from here in the process? That is a great question. So the sponsors have a year from next Tuesday, when we hold the second hearing, that they go out and collect signatures. And the signatures are collected. It's slightly more technical than this, but I'll lay out the basics. It's from owners of private real property located in the proposed municipality that covers at least 10% of the total private land, and is equal in value to at least 7% of the value of all the private real property and 10% of all the registered voters within the area. So there's more signatures that have to be gathered, very similar to that first petition, and the sponsors would then work with us and the county to make sure they got those from the correct people, so it would qualify. Once those signatures are gathered, if those signatures are gathered, then it would be placed on the ballot for a vote on whether or not the city should incorporate or not. So the question is, when would this go to vote? 2022. That all depends on when the signatures are submitted. If the signatures were submitted, before the end of the summer, there's a possibility this goes on the ballot. The first question goes on the ballot this November, and then the election of officers would happen in 2022 if the vote was in favor of incorporation. Let's see, the next question in the chat is, based on the benefit question, the numbers indicate that the money and the costs would not change, and it would be either that we pay the county and do not have local elected officials, or we can become a city and pay the city the same taxes that have local elected officials. Would this be correct? Since the numbers are the same and some even better in the later years. So Susie, what's your take on that? Would that be correct?
I think that's a pretty good interpretation of it. It's not the same year by year, but overall, you're coming out okay. If these numbers hold. Now, like I said, there are risks. There could be an economic downturn. They could also take off. I mean, look at the housing market right now. It's going crazy. Your growth could be even higher than we think, which should be to your advantage, as well. You could get more commercial development. So it could go either way. The other thing I want to reemphasize is that The estimates of the police costs and the public safety are not binding on Tooele County, but they did put it in their letterhead in the appendix to the report as their best estimate, and they did a rationale for it to give you some confidence with that, but they are not binding.
That's a good point. And Susie makes a great point that this isn't a crystal ball. This study doesn't say this is what will happen in the next 5 years, but given the assumptions that are in the study, this is what could happen. But a new city council or decisions based on what the county commission does would have impacts on that, as well as the market and other factors. So the next question in the chat: if we don't incorporate, is it possible for other communities to take us over like what happened to Kearns? That is a very interesting question. One community can't just take over another community, but property in an unincorporated area can be annexed into surrounding communities. So there is a possibility that if a landowner wanted to annex their property, into a neighboring already incorporated city, that could be done. Let's see, assume the next step would be to hold a public meeting. Is there a limit on number of open meetings, or what is your recommendation? So this is the public meeting. Next step after this is another public meeting next Tuesday, which will cover the same information. If the sponsors want to hold public meetings to gather signatures, they could hold as many meetings as they want. There's not really a requirement on that. If Lakepoint incorporates, you stated that roads would have to be fixed by us. Does that also include plowing, etc.? Susie, I'll have that one.
Yes, and that was included in the cost from the county. It's the same level of service you're now getting for your operating expenses and as much capital as you've seen them invest, like big projects, redoing of things that you've seen them invest in your area on average. So that's what it's based on, same level of service.
Okay.
Now, if you add more roads and more development, they're going to have more weighted miles, and the cost, of course, will go up over time for those kind of reasons.
Yep, absolutely. On the police, since they are not binding, could costs be negotiated to be lower once a city or combined with the IRTA or neighboring city contracts to lower costs?
You could look at Grantsville. They might be willing to do it. They indicated that they might, if it actually took place, that they actually might truly be interested in for their police to do the Lakepoint area. You might get more competitive pricing then. If you have someone else, that you're negotiating with as well, it's an option, but they chose not to participate in this study. Yeah, it's just an unknown, but you certainly would want to pursue every avenue to keep your costs down and maintain a good service level.
Yeah, and that's, Susie said it, but it bears repeating several times, is the assumption throughout this study is keeping the same level of service that this area is receiving now. A city could certainly choose to have a slightly lower level of service, but that would also make their voters mad, perhaps. So our assumption throughout this is that you would be keeping the same level of service and not cutting anything back. How do we find the link to this recording? Great question. The link to this recording will be posted on the same website where we had the Zoom link. It will also be posted on the public notice website with those notices. If anyone wants to get a link to the recording, they can also email the office. You can email annexations@utah.gov or email directly to me, Justin Lee, JUSTINLEE @utah.gov. And again, we'll note there is, so yeah, if the Zoom link was posted in Facebook, we didn't post it on Facebook, we posted it other places. So whoever posted in Facebook pulled it off of the website or the public notices where we had that. And I will say, I will put the link for our website one more time on there, just in the chat, where you'll be able to go find this link. Let's see, the next question is, how would incorporation affect farms and animal ordinances? Would Lakepoint still fall under Tooele County, or a new ordinance can be established? So Susie, I'm gonna kick that one to you.
Well, no, my understanding is that the new city council has you would take the planning and development, zoning, all of those powers with you, and that's generally one reason why communities want to incorporate. It's usually to gain the control over their own planning.
Let's see, during your study, did you have any indication that more homes and tax base is being worked on but could not be included in the study?
Yes. We were told lots of stories of it, but nothing seemed, we didn't have any, and we have a pretty good growth rate in here, but nothing that seemed like we needed to change it within the next 5 years. But the code is very clear. You look at within the next 5 years. But just given what's happening, even in the last few months on the market, like I heard the other day that the average number of days on home for or the number of days on market for a home in the Salt Lake Valley is 5. A year ago, it was 26. So things are we have a housing shortage, so it could take off.
Okay, any other questions from anybody? Okay, when you form a city, is it not true that you can form a city charter or similar that sets up the city, and having locally elected officials can make it so a city can have what they desire and want with ordinances, etc. Susie, I'll let you answer part of that, but I will also say, yes, the city has a lot of authority to enact the ordinances they want. That being said, there are also some state laws that dictate things that cities have to do, certain parameters that cities have to have. So it's not carte blanche to do anything you want, but certainly a city has a lot of authority and a lot of ability to decide what happens within their boundaries.
Yeah, there's always, every session of the legislature, there's always the land use section of all of the bills that address different land use issues. And you do have to, as Justin said, you do have to follow state law, but rather than the county doing the local part, it would be the city. And if you'll notice, we put extra legal startup costs in the first year. And that's the very reason why, is you're going to need to get some of these ordinances and things in place.
As far as commercial development, as we all know, the Adobe Rock development was voted down and halted. That for now, if Lakepoint incorporates, will we have even more say on how that may or may not come to happen?
I don't know the background on it, but generally, I would think that you would establish your own planning commission, and you would they'd make recommendations to your city council, and that you would have say, I just don't know the background on this. So there's I'm a little hesitant if there was something, about it that caused it to fail.
Yeah, we can say generally that, yeah, cities make, zoning choices, and they have a planning commission. That being said, if you pass an ordinance or something, then the city would be now the one getting the referendum, not the county, on some kind of zoning decision. So you may find yourself on the flip side of that. I'm giving it a couple minutes here because I know people are typing in questions, and that takes a second. So if you have questions, please keep them coming. But I will say, if we don't see any questions by 7:10, then we will end the meeting at that point. But I will leave it open for at least those couple of minutes if anyone has a question. Not a question, but thank you both. We appreciate that. Let's see, what questions are usually found to not be true when you do these studies that you can clear up for us? You cleared up a town hall or city building is not required, but can you clear up any other ones you hear that are not accurate? That's a very good question. Susie, what questions do we get sometimes that haven't been asked?
Well, let's think about that one. Well, we get the question. People are always concerned about police and public safety, and we do get a question on that. If they, will they maintain the same level of service? Then that's certainly up to new city council. But the study does measure that. Let's see. They asked about what form of government, who the city council, how that happens, that process to have a mayor, city council, and there are different forms of government that you can set up for that. And I'm sure if this progresses, that everyone will be educated on that. Oh, I thought of one more. What was let me think my other one. City Hall. Oh, the level of service in the study. Let me just go over that one more time. And I think Justin and I have both hit it, but that's confusing to people that I'm measuring the same service level. Just let me reemphasize that's because of Utah code. But if you choose to become a city, your elected officials through them, you can change your service levels. You can add it so you have a full-time patrol always inside Lakepoint. You can add an extra officer. You can, add whatever it is that you want on the roads. You can bump up that service level. Your taxes could go up if you chose to do some of these things and voted, more property tax. You could choose to, it seems cities go down a path where they contract for services at the beginning, and then they start, as they get bigger, sometimes then wanting to do more of these services in-house themselves, adding on, contracting out less. But it seems to be a progression. At first, it's just, let's contract these out and survive, and then we'll worry if we want to provide our own public works department or whatever. So those are typical questions, but you could do your own. You don't have to contract out. You could do your own public works. You could do your own police. It just would be really hard at first.
Mm-hmm.
What else? Do you have any other questions?
Let's see. I think that people also get confused on taxes that we will pay. The taxes to the county and taxes to cities, so the taxes will go up. But if we do not change the service, it is correct that taxes we pay the county will just be transferred and now be paid by the city. So yeah, will the taxes just be transferred from the county to the city?
Well, okay, so you're paying two tax rates we saw there in that slide to Tooele County. You're paying the general fund rate, and you'll keep paying that same rate unless Tooele County, decides to change it, has a public hearing or something to raise it. So you keep paying that because those are services that the county offers countywide. But then if the municipal services tax rate, that goes into a separate fund at the county, and that is used to provide services to the unincorporated part of the county, services that cities provide. So if you're in Tooele City, they're going to provide your police, they're going to take care of your parks, they're going to snowplow your roads. So the county does that for you. So if you come out and become your own city, they'll say, oh, you got to do that yourself now. But they can't charge you once you're in a city that municipal service tax rate. So your county rate would go, so the county, that amount you pay to the county you wouldn't pay that to the county anymore. As a city, then you would have to enact that property tax rate or any one you want. I use the same one to show you what the impacts would be without affecting your pocketbook with more taxes.
So I think what I heard Susie just say that is sometimes a misconception is that running your own city is really easy, as opposed to letting the county do it. And it's not. I mean, there's plenty that's complicated, and there's things that have to be paid for and services that need to be provided. And so I think that's the misconception, or perhaps the thing that a lot of people, not saying you shouldn't do this, but I think some people get shocked when they finally get put in charge of the city about the level of complexity that's involved.
Here's a misconception. You made me think of one, Justin, right along those same lines. Sometimes people in the incorporate think, well, I'm paying taxes to the county. They have to still keep providing these services. No, they only have to provide the ones that are paid for by the general fund. They don't have to provide the ones paid out of the municipal fund, like the police and the roads. But that is a common misconception.
So I think this is a good question in the chat. Developers that are currently building in Lakepoint and have the green light to move forward, what happens with once there's incorporation? What would those developers have to be put on pause and be required to meet the requirements of a new council if changes were made, or can changes be made? So what happens to ongoing development, Susie, when a new city incorporates?
Yeah, it just keeps going where it is now. They're not gonna, they can't backtrack and undo. You have that reliance in the permits that have been granted and all of that, because they were the valid source to get them from on the day they were granted.
So yeah, so doing the incorporation does not automatically put a pause on any kind of development at all. So it is clear that the study says we will have the same level of service, but no taxes raised, is a question.
It's just a study. Given those numbers, yeah, measuring, you wouldn't, but what would a new city council do, or what might you want to do as a community? You should be able, what it tells you is you should be able to do it without paying more taxes than you are now for the same level of service. That's simply what it tells you. It doesn't tell you that a new council won't decide to do that, but it tells you you should be able to do it.
I'll see, but if developers have not obtained permits or approvals from the county, then they would then file with the city, correct?
Well, after it takes over as a city, depends on your timing. You'd still do the county. You're still doing the county right now.
So yeah, once the city goes into effect, anything that would normally be filed with the city would then be filed with the city. Anything that would normally be filed with the county would be filed with the county. You just add that city into the mix. Again, I'm just going to give it a couple more minutes to see if there's any additional questions or comments. So comments, I'm sure that also applies to current developer agreements. Yeah, current agreements, current things that are currently worked on. There is no Lakepoint right now as far as a city is concerned. So everything continues forward with the county just like it would until Lakepoint is officially certified as a city. And the earliest that would take place is really late December of 2022. When a city said they could not work with the developer in their agreement to work together for desire of the city. Let's see. Oh, I think the question, when could a city, okay, so when a city could they not work with the developer and their agreement to work together for the desire of the city if they desire? So I think it's when could a city not work with a developer? Well, that's really a question for the city if they don't want to work with a developer, grant permits. But Susie, I don't know if you have any input on that.
No, cities are bound by laws too. There's land use laws, and developers have rights as well within those. So I don't think a city can just arbitrarily turn something down. Remember years and years ago when there was that de-annexation from Bluffdale, because the Sorensen group went after them and they were able to de-annex. They went to Harriman because they weren't getting what they wanted from the city and felt that, and they were upheld in court for doing some things. So developers have some rights too.
Let's see, what are the common reasons why people incorporate? Oh, that's a good question. We've done, so our office has only been in charge of the corporation process for about 5 years now. And each place has kind of its own story. So Susie, I don't know what you think over the years, what you've seen.
Yeah, I've seen a couple.
Seems to be a big
You've got with them too. Planning and zoning. They want control over that. Sometimes there's antagonism between an area and a county. I've seen that, to be honest. Did one in New York where it was a very well-to-do area that felt like it was supporting the rest of the county, and it wanted to, and that none of the money was coming back for their roads, and so they wanted to carve off and be their own area. What are some other reasons you've seen, Justin? I'm trying to think.
A lot of the ones we've seen recently seem to come down to development, a disagreement between a community the county about development. Yeah, a lot of it, level of service. I think when Brighton incorporated a couple years ago, there was some real disputes between the county and that area about how the level of service was being provided. Decisions on traffic flow and all kinds of different things. One guy really just wanted to be a mayor, um, and he ultimately did be a mayor. And then that city disincorporated because, like I said, once they incorporated, they found out it wasn't quite as fun as they had thought. And I will say, we do have another meeting next Tuesday. It'll be at the same time, 6:30. We'll have a Zoom link that will be put out next Monday. If you go to that municert.utah.gov page that I shared in the chat, that will be out there next Monday. So if you think of questions, you can certainly come again next week. You can always reach out to our office, and we're happy to answer questions. Let's see, are there also decisions to local service, local elected officials making decisions easier with planning and money and things taking place in Lakepoint, not having to be distributed through the whole county and decisions not having to be based on the whole county? Certainly the area that you make decisions is smaller. Whether that is easier or not, I'm not sure. I can make a judgment call on that, but you are making decisions over a smaller area, and you do have the local, people closer to where the decision's being made, making that decision. Again, I would be really hesitant to say easier or not on that, but certainly it's more localized. I think we will take one more question if there is one. There we go. Here's our last question. How about would you say the money made in Lakepoint comes back to Lakepoint? So yeah, I mean, if you're saying it is a point, yeah, money that is raised in Lakepoint goes to Lakepoint. Certainly, yeah, there's not the same distribution across the county as you would get in that city.
Yeah, we come back from property tax, increased values from sales. If commercial business goes in and you have sales, retail sales, you would get that back. You do not get corporate income tax back at a local level, though, that's state. So just keep that in mind.
And I think with that, I think we'll end the broadcast there. Again, thank everyone for participating. We will post this. It will be up in the next couple of days, and there will be another public meeting next Tuesday. So if you have your friends, neighbors, people that you want to be involved or have questions, please let them know that they can join next Tuesday. But thank you all for your time, and I wish you a good evening.